Today we're going to be talking about measuring what matters, which is also going to include a bit of a discussion around startup definitions. Any of our partners have probably come across this topic already, and indeed we've probably had many discussions around it. So yeah, we wanted to distill some of the things we hear about what is a startup into this webinar today. So we're going to cover that for the first few minutes, and then we actually want to talk about what we think matters and measuring what matters. So we're going to give an example of what some of the leading ecosystems are measuring, and we're actually going to show you how you can do that yourself. I didn't even introduce myself, I realised. I'm Aoife. I'm the head of ecosystem growth here at Dealroom. I'm joined by my colleague Orla Browne, our head of insights. I'm calling in from Amsterdam. Orla's calling in from London, United Kingdom. Yeah. And we're going to be walking you through this webinar today. So thanks so much for joining. All right. I'm going to kick off actually with kind of framing this subject in general. So yeah, I'm sure many of you have been tasked with reporting how many startups are in your ecosystem. And I'm sure that when many of you have tried to attempt this, you've been faced with another pretty key question, and that's, what is a startup in the first place, right? This kind of can bring you down a rabbit hole. Like, does a freelancer with an app count as a startup? What about a 9-year-old SaaS company? What about university spinouts if they haven't been incorporated yet? Should we count that? So this isn't just a kind of local problem or a problem in regional, national ecosystems. Even at the European level, it's become a super hot topic. So in March this year, just in the last couple of weeks, the European Commission published its first ever formal definition of an innovative startup and an innovative scale-up. This had 3 tiers, 3 thresholds. These are kind of 3 tiers and hard thresholds rather. So these are companies with under 100 employees, under 10 million euro in turnover, less than 10 years old, plus R&D spend criteria. So this was like a very serious attempt to create a common language across all the 27 member states. And even this is really being hotly debated. So some people are saying it's too narrow. Some people are saying it's not accounting for, let's say, like deep tech startups who have a different growth path to maybe a SaaS startup, for example. And people are also asking if the revenue cap makes sense for the same reason. It might not really apply to some deep tech or biotech companies. So this is a hot debate, and I've given you the European example, but I know from many of our partners around the world that this is a bit of a global issue as well, right? There's not really a nice coherent definition that everyone agrees on. But I do think what is true is that some of the more advanced ecosystems and some that are really accelerating have already kind of moved off this topic, right? So they're not even really discussing this. They've stopped trying to agree on one key definition, and they're actually measuring what the ecosystem is doing at the moment and what it can do, all right? So I'm not going to walk through every other definition that's available, but I did want to look into a wee bit like why this debate is maybe more of a symptom and not the disease itself. So what does the definition landscape look like at the moment in just a minute or two? So there's no universal definition, as I said. In terms of kind of how old a startup should be, to give you a few examples, Italy says it should be under 5 years old. It also says it should have a 15% R&D spend and a patent, by the way. India says it should be less than 10 years old and have up to $24 million in turnover, but not more. And Paul Graham, who we often quote at Dealroom, says the only thing that matters is growth. Okay, so the age threshold is kind of fluctuating wildly. The kind of revenue caps that countries propose fluctuates wildly, goes from 200k in one place to 50 million in another place. So overall, there's, as I said, just not anything coherent. And when the definitions are all different, the numbers are all different. So if you are still trying to quote one single number and benchmark it against another ecosystem, you're going to have a really hard time. So maybe, Orla, if I can ask you a little bit more about this, why do you think this whole startup definition thing is maybe a bit of a red herring in the first place?
Well, it was interesting you saying there about how some ecosystems have kind of moved away from trying to create a definition. It almost made me want to create that kind of like meme of the enlightenment, that you start without one and then you maybe make one and then you realize, oh, maybe we don't need one after all. But I mean, there's very practical reasons why people want to have one, and often it's for absolutely the best intentions. It's because you want to kind of support startups in your ecosystem, create certain provisions for them, and for that you want to make sure that it's reaching the right people. And for those kind of use cases, it makes sense to try and create a bit of criteria, and it might be that the criteria for a deep tech provision is actually going to be different than the criteria for something else, for like general R&D tax credits, for example. So in that sense, you don't actually need a general definition of what a startup is. You just need a definition of the kind of companies you want to support with a particular provision. But of course, it's kind of tempting to try and create a universal answer. And I mean, from our perspective, you mentioned Paul Graham there. So Paul Graham is one of the founders of Y Combinator, the wildly successful incubator from Silicon Valley. And his definition of a startup is a company that's built to grow fast. And, you know, what does company mean? Does it have to be incorporated? What does fast mean? Is there a particular growth rate around that? Well, I mean, you can kind of debate all of these things, but at the end of the day, we consider a startup to be a company that is built to grow fast. And that's a very useful thing to think about, because it means that it's not necessarily a company that is a tech company. Lots of startups are tech enabled because that enables you to grow fast. But it could be a company that has a very innovative business model. But it's not every company that's innovative either. There could be lots of like super high tech companies that are lower growth, and therefore we wouldn't consider them a startup. And you know, it's always said as well that the best startups break the mold anyway. So regardless of what definition you create, you'll be able to find an exceptional example of a company that you definitely would consider a startup, but that wouldn't match that criteria. So yeah, this is all reason to say, like, we understand the desire for a specific definition, or to look for one number as an answer, but we think that there's a lot more you can kind of that you can measure that is then going to be more easily benchmarkable internationally as well, because you mentioned all of these different people with different definitions. So yeah, we want to kind of share what some of the people that we work with do measure, and why, and how you can do that, basically.
Yeah, nice. So that is a nice segue into the next portion of the webinar. So instead of just looking at a single number of companies, what do the best ecosystems measure?
Yes, so let me share my screen. So we created an evidence pack of data for a government of one of the leading tech ecosystems in the world. And yeah, we thought it would be good to show you exactly what they ask for. So, a lot of people will be familiar with the data that we publish in reports. We do also do work that isn't necessarily published, and this is a sort of consultancy type work that we're doing. And yeah, this is aimed to be shared with policymakers and people inside government. This could be at a local or regional, national level, but this is to inform the senior leaders and decision makers. And yeah, this is just like a practical example of some of the stuff that they measure and that we help them to measure. So I've redacted basically a bunch of these charts, but they kind of would fit for any ecosystem as some of the relevant things to look at. So if we go on, I've just deleted the name here, but these are the things that we kind of go over in the deck. So we're going through venture capital, enterprise value, unicorns and thoroughbreds, which I can explain a bit more about as well, and then some sector deep dives. So starting on venture capital, and this is a chart that you might see in some of the reports we publish publicly as well, but it's absolutely bread and butter fundamental data that you can be tracking every quarter, every year, and by stage and by time series. So yeah, this is time series venture capital data by stage. So it's looking at how much investment has been raised by all the startups in this region, and how much has been raised at early stage, breakout stage, and late stage. So and these stage windows we can keep consistent across any geography that we're looking at as well. So early stage is considered under 15 million. So that's sort of pre-seed, seed, series A. And then we've got breakout investment, and then late stages over 100 million. So yeah, this is kind of, we'll show you in a sec how you can find this in the platform, but super important to be checking in with this data, as I said, annually or quarterly. And we've actually even made it even easier to find this more recently as well. So I'll show that in a sec as well.
And maybe, Orla, if I can add one thing on that, and maybe this is totally stating the obvious for some people, but like here we can actually say, obviously how many companies are raising at each of these stages. So instead, again, of just having this one single number, we can say there are this many companies at this stage, and there are this many companies at breakout stage and at growth stage who are raising at the moment. So again, for people who do want to identify the companies and not just the absolute number in terms of like funding raised, that is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And it actually becomes a lot more concrete when you get to funding as well, because we can say, like, where it's more difficult to say what is a startup because everyone's got a different definition, we can say, well, this number of companies have raised between 10 and 20 million. That's just an absolute number. So that one we can do. I'll get on to like Bootstrapped as well, by the way, because we don't want to leave out those companies. But yeah, this section just looking at venture capital for now. Then we also have some international benchmarks in here. So this is kind of looking at the same data, but for a few key geographies that you might choose as similar to in size or geographically, or kind of peer ecosystems. You might decide on certain ones based on what the size of your overall economy is, and is your tech economy kind of matching up at the same rate or something. But being able to put the data from the previous slide into context, basically, and also track that again over time to see whether you're catching up or losing ground. Also super important.
And have apples to apples, I suppose, rather than apples to oranges.
Yeah. Again, this is kind of completely apples and apples data. So you're not comparing your number of startups by your definition versus another geographies on their definition, which then, who knows what you're looking at that point. Diving further into the venture capital area, one of the things that we can also look at is the source of that capital. So understanding what's the mix of capital looking like in your region, how much of it is coming from local investors, how much of it is coming from investors from overseas, and how is that changing over time as well. So are you getting more reliant or on overseas investment? Equally, you could say, are we getting better at attracting international investment? But understanding that dynamic is important for making policy decisions about whether whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, or whatever it might be, but understanding the landscape. We can also break this down by stage. So quite common to see that you actually have a much higher percentage of your investment at early stages domestic, for example. And then, so, in this overall number, you can't see all the nuances of that. But when we break it down by stage, we can see, okay, there's, a lot of local investors at earlier stages. And then for later stage, maybe you're more reliant on overseas investment, and also how that's changed over time. This is a 10-year span between the two columns in each section here. So you can see how things are moving. And similarly, in terms of the source of venture capital, not just geographically, but you can see what the investor type mix looks like. Because only about 50% of venture capital actually comes from VCs. So the rest is also quite important. So understanding how much, are your local corporates putting their hands in their pockets enough, or are the CVCs getting involved? What about sovereign wealth funds, family offices, angels and crowdfunding, all of these other investment sources that make up the rest of the mix? And we can also look at the graduation rate of startups. So what this means is, for any company that successfully raises seed investment, what percentage of those go on to successfully raise Series A and Series B and Series C and so on. So you kind of see maybe where you potentially have, if you see a big drop off, then that can tell you, oh, maybe we've got a bit of a funding gap at that stage. Why is that? And that can kind of be investigated a little bit more. And again, here, this was kind of benchmarking against other ecosystems as well. So you could see how you're faring with whether it's a global numbers or other city or other country or whatever it might be. So that's a little bit on the VC side, but going into enterprise value. So we can also look at the combined enterprise value of an ecosystem. So if you add up the value of all the private and public companies and see what that comes to, track that over time, also see whether the youngest cohorts are generating more value than the older ones, and what the dynamic looks like. Not just looking at the total number, but also breaking it out by the age and founding year of those companies.
Maybe on that one, Orla, as well, I was just thinking about it earlier because one of our partners asked about it. Like, I think having those cohorts is really useful if you are in an ecosystem where you are only counting startups of a certain age, actually, because you can just say, I want to look at the ecosystem value for companies founded since 2010, for example. And I mean, maybe you'll look at that on the platform in a second, but I think it's good to know that there's like flexibility there if you want to compare your ecosystem with others, just looking at companies of a certain age.
Yeah, exactly. So quite common that we have a particular cutoff date, which is we talk about companies founded after 1990, but you can drill down into a different subset if you want to as well. Yeah. We can also look at companies based on that same information again, combined enterprise value. But based on whether they're exited or still private, so you can see what the overall pipeline for your startups looks like. Is it all just kind of successful exited companies, or have you still got some companies in there that are going to exit soon? Let me just do that again. And the next thing we can also look at is unicorns. Now, there's a bit of debate about, how valuable is counting unicorns. Just because your company's valued at $1 billion doesn't mean that it's creating real impact. Well, I mean, it can be, it's still a useful thing to have in the mix, I would say. Like, it definitely shouldn't be the only thing that you're measuring. But it does tell you whether you're managing to create late stage outcomes or not. And the other thing you can also check is, how that your unicorn count is doing versus other geographies as well. So understanding, if things are slowing down again, or if other geographies are catching up to you, basically. So a useful thing to have in your mind for sure, I would say, because at the end of the day as well, like if we were to look at the combined enterprise value piece, a large proportion of that value does come from the unicorns. It's these outlier success stories in ecosystems that really make the biggest difference. And another thing that we can look at is thoroughbreds, which we can talk a little bit about as well. So thoroughbreds are what we call companies that are generating at least 100 million in revenue. And these are, again, another way of looking at late stage outcomes. So these are ones that are not just necessarily have that promise with the late stage valuation, but that are really generating a lot of value as well with the 100 million revenues. It's useful to look at both of these at the same time, I think, because on the deep tech side, for example, you might have a company that's valued at $1 billion because they've got amazing technology that if they crack it, then it's going to be great. But they might not be generating revenue yet. So you wouldn't necessarily want to leave those out of some of the big success stories that you're talking about.
Maybe on this, Orla, as well, and I think because you said you would mention it at some point, so maybe I'm also skipping ahead. But we talk a lot, or our partners, let's say, ask us a lot about bootstrapped companies, because certain ecosystems are not necessarily as let's say, like either reliant or inclined to go for VC backing necessarily, and might have a lot of like bootstrapped companies who do end up being really successful, and then you still want to make sure they're like captured in the ecosystem value. So for thoroughbreds, let's say, we're not just looking at VC backed companies, right? Like we're also looking at those bootstrapped ones.
Yeah, and the same for unicorns, in fact. So a large percentage of unicorns are VC backed, but not all of them. And it does vary in different regions. So for example, in like Central and Eastern Europe, like 30% of the unicorns are actually bootstrapped. So they've generated revenue to get to that $1 billion valuation. And again, you would pick them up earlier as well with the thoroughbreds thing. But we do count them all. It's just that it's a much smaller percentage on a global level. So it's more like 3 to 5% of unicorns, but they would still be included in this count. As I said, it might be like a nice, useful thing to pull out depending on your ecosystem to have a look at the split. In this chart here, we've got kind of exited versus non-realized, but you could equally put in a kind of bootstrapped versus VC-backed lens on some of your analysis as well. So in this section, we had a few different topics that were of particular strategic interest for the ecosystem. So we had like quantum, but you could have like semiconductors or nuclear or any biotech, any other host of topics that are of particular interest. And here we did actually put in a number of startups number. So that's kind of why I wanted to put it, because you'll notice kind of in the rest of the deck, we didn't actually mention at all. We weren't asked to put a number on like how many startups are there in here in overall. But if you're looking at a very specific niche, then there's somewhere that it might become a bit more relevant, because in something like quantum, it's not a huge number. So you're going to be able to, like, you should be able to know who they all are, because you're not coming up against the question marks of like, oh, is that a startup? Well, you're either doing quantum computing or you're not, kind of thing. And so here we can kind of put a number on it, and it is useful for them to like know all of them so that they can have them all mapped and on their radar. And then equally look at, the number that overall, the number that are VC backed. Then again, some of these metrics, again, the combined enterprise value, VC investment, unicorns, thoroughbreds. And then what we also had here was the percentage of a bigger region that is in this geography. So you can actually see here, for example, they have 28% of the VC-backed startups, but a much higher percentage of the value and the VC investment. That's kind of interesting. Could be the opposite, and then you might be thinking, I wonder why we're not managing to get these startups funded if we're managing to start them. So again, those kind of dynamics kind of useful to track.
This is also maybe, I don't know if we're going to look at other sectors as well, but yesterday we were talking about how earlier ecosystems earlier in their development can measure themselves, because what if you don't have the $1 billion valuation outcomes or the thoroughbreds or whatever, or a huge amount in terms of just funding volume. I think the sector angle is a really interesting one to look at, because maybe you are an emerging ecosystem, but maybe you're extremely good at defense tech, for example, or you're really good at biotech. There's plenty of ecosystems that really are specializing and are a hub within a certain sector. So being able to measure that and compare that, I think is really useful, even if the overall volumes aren't crazy yet.
Yeah, and we can also help you see which ones those are. And sometimes the sectors are actually different than the ones that you think you might be the strongest in. So we can show that as well. But yeah, so that was all of the, I did only just put in one deep dive example. But what we can do is also go and have a look at where we can find some of this data in the app as well. So lots of you will be familiar with Dealroom, but maybe not with where to find all of this data. And lots of it is available kind of directly in the app. So what we can start with maybe is the investment. If we go to this funding rounds section here, you'll see that this already looks like the same kind of colors that was in the chart I had before. This is already got a kind of methodology applied of what we would include. So we don't include grants, for example. We don't include SPAC private placements. You can, if you want to look at those, you can include them, but it's already kind of ready-made for you with the funding rounds tab here. And then we can start filtering. So we had somebody join from Alberta, so we can put Alberta in here as well. And then it can automatically show us what's happening in Alberta in terms of investment over time. And we can change it to have a look at it quarterly or annually or monthly. And very quickly see some of the data here. What's also useful to mention, I mention this every time because it's such a small thing, but it's very useful, is this table view button here. So you can toggle between chart view and table view, but it means that you can then copy and paste this data if you want to, and then you can easily make charts elsewhere or manipulate the data as you like. And underneath, you'll also always see all of the rounds that are contributing to that. So if I click on 2026, then it will sort by the biggest rounds in 2026 in Alberta in that period.
Can I? We'll cover some questions at the end of the webinar, but I was just going to ask you one, Orla, because you're on the tab. James Freeman asked, are we just looking at VC here, or are we including angel and or PE additions?
Yeah, so good, very good question. So we are including venture capital as a capital type, so not just money from VC funds, but so this would include angel as a form of kind of early venture capital. It wouldn't include PE unless it's there's always exceptions in here where it's like a growth VC round with participation from a PE firm. So, but it's more about the type of capital, not not the investor type. So yeah, this is venture capital, but as I showed before, not necessarily from a VC fund, and in fact, about half of it isn't. So hopefully that explains. We do track lots of other transaction types as well. So I showed grants there, so we can click to look at some of the Alberta grants that have been happening. But we also have in here exits. So you can see, M&A activity, and in overall transactions, you would see other types as well. There's a whole mix in here. So this is with no filters attached. Then we're seeing like a mix of grants and post-IPO equity and all the rest. But yeah, if we just go to this funding rounds tab, that's just showing VC. So the next thing I was going to show as well, actually, so we've kind of done the first chart that was in that deck, but we then had a look at source of investment. So you can toggle to that here. So I'm going to put on a filter again, just so we can see it in action. But if we put Canada and investor location, now you'll see that we've got some of the same colors here, but they mean different things. So we can see that the darkest blue is domestic investment. And then you can also see how much has come from European investors into Canada, how much has come from the US, which is actually more than domestic, and Asia, and so on. And we can also, if we click 100% scale here, we can start seeing the percentages, so how much this has changed. So you can see over time, it's not dramatic, but actually there's a bit of a growth in terms of US, the share of investment that's coming from the US, and maybe slightly downward trend for domestic, and rising from Europe. That's kind of interesting. So yes, you can really quickly get some really nice insights here. And then I also showed how we split that out between what does it look like at early stage versus breakout versus late. So we can also apply those filters again in here. So if I go to advanced filters, if I go to rounds, and we said 0 to 15 is early stage. So I've put a max deal size of 15 million on here. And now it's just redone the chart for me underneath. So we can see that's popped up. So we've got a higher percentage that's coming from domestic at early stage. If I take that off again, what was that? So it's 44 at early stage, 28 overall. So quite a big difference. And we could also add the same parameters as we had before for breakout and late stage, and then do that comparison and see how that changes over time as well. So this is like a really, really powerful tool, I would say, for helping to inform policy and just understanding the overall capital landscape. And the other bit that I showed in terms of investor source was type as well. So that bit about 50% coming from VCs, but not the rest. So if I switch here to investor type, then I can see, 51% in Canada is coming from VC funds, but we've got 22% coming from corporates and CVCs, and 26% from other. And you can kind of drill down into that a bit more, that other bit a bit more if you want to as well, if you kind of export the rounds and analyze it that way. But yeah, you can also, do a quick comparison to be like, is that a typical amount? Well, we can compare it to the global number by just removing that filter again. And we can see actually it's a little bit higher than global. Or you can add in, if you want to compare Canada and the US, then you can do that too, and find the data here. So yeah, really nice and quick to change.
And again, Orla, this is it's related to a question in the chat, but timely that this person asked it, Victoria. Is it possible to drill down into like what rounds actually have, let's say, a US investor participating? So like the whole source of funds question.
Yes, for sure. So we can, if I go to the filters again, and I go to the transaction locations. Wait, is that what I want? Let me check. Investor location. So I've got at the moment HQ US. So this is just looking at deals happening for in US startups. But if I want to see of those deals, the ones that have got participation from German investors, why not? Let's have a look. I can put that in and I'll see them below. So here they are. Let's see if I can spot some of them. So here we go, Deutsche Börse Group, for example. That's going to be one of the German components in this deal that was for a San Francisco startup. So yeah, and if I switch back some of these to absolute scale, round size, let's have a look. So I've never looked at this chart before, but this is the total value of deals with German investor involvement in the US. And yeah, so you can do that just with a few clicks. The other thing on locations, actually, which is often a question is, yeah, so at the moment I'm looking at HQ location, but sometimes there's questions around like, but actually that company was founded here, so we would count them or whatever. So you can actually choose from a few various options in here as well. So I was using HQ filter here, but you can also use HQ or founded. So let's put in Austin, because I think there was an Austin contingent on the call. So yeah, we can decide to look at investment into any company that's founded or headquartered in Austin. So that means companies that were founded in Austin and moved away, or vice versa. And you can count them both together, or you can look at one or the other. Or you can also, as you saw in there, probably look at any company with an Austin office. So you can kind of decide which ones to look at, and to look at the kind of different layers of the ecosystem, different nuances, different lenses. We tend to go with HQ with our kind of standard reporting. But yeah, it's especially for some early stage ecosystems, it's useful to understand the broader landscape of the HQ and founded ones as well, because often they still have quite strong ties to the domestic the original ecosystem. It might be where some of the capital will end up getting redistributed at an exit point. It might be that they still have a decent sized team there and things like that. So you can choose which ones you want to look at.
And maybe two things on that. I'm really going to try to not go off on a tangent here, but the first thing is I think Austin just had a historic quarter, best quarter ever. Roland is here, so Roland can say in the chat if that's the case. Mm-hmm. But congrats, Austin. And then the second thing was maybe this ends up being a full second, a full other webinar, but just in terms of where the HQ founded and where even founders are based themselves question, it is something we can look at on the platform, in the sense that we can look at, maybe founders that came from a certain ecosystem and, set up their business somewhere else entirely, right? No actual link with the ecosystem, or maybe they studied at a university in a certain place, but set up their company somewhere else. Like, this is super interesting information. It helps you measure things like, leakage within the ecosystem. There can, of course, be many reasons why founders move and decide to set up other places. So I don't think we have a silver bullet for answering those kind of things, but we have a lot of interesting data that helps tell a story around, like, alumni founders and diaspora and various things. So again, we'll go down a full other rabbit hole with that, but I wanted to mention it.
We do. It would be a rabbit hole. We have done it a bit on a previous one, I think. So we can maybe direct people there, but we have loads of data on it. And if people would like to collaborate on that, then they should get in touch, because it takes a couple extra steps to get to, but it can be pretty fascinating. Yes, and look at this quarter for Austin. Nice one.
Congrats, Austin.
Yeah. The next thing that was on in that deck was combined enterprise value. So I want to show that one next as well, because we've done a bit of VC. So what we can do here is go to companies, and we can also find this this save search here. It says combined enterprise value. and it will show you a nice chart. So this is showing kind of funded companies by default, but we can also we could take that off, or we can just look at VC backed. You can decide on the scope there. But this is showing, now it's showing global value of VC backed companies founded since 1990. But we can, again, add on, I think I saw Hamburg in the chat earlier. We can have a look at Hamburg and see the combined enterprise value of Hamburg startups is 17 billion there for VC backed. And we can see the most valuable companies that are contributing to that as well. So 1.5, About You, Deposit Solutions. So it's automatically got these colors on here for the different cohorts. So the companies founded since 2020 are in the lightest red. So actually some of the most valuable cohorts are the most recently founded, which is quite cool. So if I were to add on, because the other thing that you mentioned, Aoife, was like sometimes people want to look at companies founded more recently rather than just companies founded since 1990. So we could have a look at 2000, and you can see the chart here as well. So 16 billion up from 1 in 2010. So quite a lot of growth there, which is pretty cool.
It's interesting you do this as well for Hamburg, because indeed a lot of our German ecosystem partners do look at age limit in terms of the startups within their ecosystem. So yeah, like it's good to know you can do this and easily compare if you think, okay, I want to compare with a city in the UK, but they're not using this same definition, you can easily just apply it on the platform. So again, you can compare apples to apples. So you're not limited just if you need your own definition, you can still apply it and use it to compare with other ecosystems.
Yeah, 100%. And I mentioned as well that one of the reasons unicorns are important is because they make up a large portion of the value. Well, we can also switch this chart to look at enterprise value by valuation, and then we can see exactly how much is coming from unicorns. So in this case, it's like a third, and that would be quite a small number of companies, but making up a third of the value. And then how much is being made up of companies valued between 200 and a billion, and then the longer tail of 0 to 200 million valued companies. So that's kind of a nice little one to look at as well. Yes, and then you can also look at the ones that are the value of the ones that have been acquired, for example. So we kind of showed before that there was a bit of a mix. You can do the split between kind of still private or ones that have exited. So you can kind of add on different filters for that as well as you're going along. The next bit I think we got to was unicorns. Yes. So I will go to that bit next. Let me see. So yeah, there's a few different places you can look at unicorns in the app. One is, still on this companies section, and we have this whole bit here that's for unicorns. And so this top filter, that is what we kind of apply to any company that we consider a unicorn. And you can see in the tab here, we've got and $1 billion exits. So we also count those as part of our unicorns and $1 billion exits. So, and that's because, if you're trying to measure the number of successful outcomes of an ecosystem, it would be kind of strange to stop counting it after it has successfully exited, because you'd actually see your number go down after these companies exit. So that's we through these different filters under here as well, you can just look at the ones that are still private if you like, but what we tend to look at in terms of big outcomes is unicorns and $1 billion exits. So you can use this one here. And then you can add on a filter for what you want to look at as well. So can you remind me somebody else? That was Czechia in the chat, wasn't there? So we can have a look at Czechia's ones. So here we've got 4 that are headquartered there, but we can also have a look, I suspect, at must be a larger number of HQ and founded. Let's have a look. Here we go, 6. So yeah, because there are a couple that have relocated. Muse, I think, are in Amsterdam. Yeah, and Product Board in San Francisco. But these are, still companies with Czech ties for sure. So we often would report on a HQ and founded number of unicorns in that kind of a situation.
And sorry, Orla, no, I was just thinking of this. We were discussing yesterday the fact that we also have on the bootstrap topic, this bootstrap to 1 billion tag.
Yes, that is under here. Where is it? Maybe not. We do have it there. Bootstrapped. Bootstrapped to 1 billion. Here we go. Yeah, so we have got 54 companies that were bootstrapped to 1 billion. So yeah, some really big names in there, like Atlassian. I know that checkout.com, I think, are in here because they did raise, but only after they'd become unicorn, things like that. So Bunk, actually, I didn't know that's an interesting one too. Yeah, and loads of these are from Central and Eastern Europe, as I mentioned. Like we've got Poznan, yeah, another Poland. So yeah, all of these companies do also have the unicorn and $1 billion exit tag, so they were still counted in that previous view as well. But if you do just want to look at the bootstrapped ones, you can see them here too. We also have a whole dedicated unicorn section. So that one is useful for just kind of getting a quick list. But this is where you can kind of become a bit obsessed with all your stats and data on unicorns. So if we go to this section here, we can have a look at loads of charts that are pre-built for us on unicorns. So we can see the number that are realized and unrealized, bootstrapped or not, the ones that are thoroughbreds or not, the ones that are private or exited. We can look at the global distribution of them. And on here, we can also apply filters. So we can have a look at, what was another country that was, let's look at France. And again, we can decide whether we want to look at just HQ, founded, or both. And then we can see, loads of info about them. So how many of them are in Europe versus, interestingly, that 14 of those French unicorns are in North America. And you could see as well what kind of sectors they're operating in. This one is really nice because this shows the development over time. So this shows the cumulative in the bars, but also the new ones on the line. So you can just switch to just have a look at how many new ones. So two new ones so far this year, doing pretty good, only a few months in. This is a super useful tool for tracking your unicorns. We also have thoroughbreds in here. So it's kept my filters for me handily here. So we can see some of the French thoroughbreds as well. So the 100 million revenue plus companies like Penny Lane, Ledger, Mistral and others. And also what the overlap between those thoroughbreds and those unicorns are as well. So hopefully there's lots of kind of pre-built tools for people to use here to be able to replicate a lot of what some other ecosystems are measuring all the time and kind of checking in on. I think the important bit is kind of as well as it not being about kind of one number, it's not about doing one snapshot either. It's useful to be able to check in quarterly or half yearly or annually at how things are changing with all of these numbers.
Nice. And maybe on that note, the quarterly report section is right under where you are now on the unicorns bit. This is actually going to be updated with Q1 tomorrow. So
yes.
You can check back in. Maybe we can drop the link as well in the chat. But if you check back in there at some stage tomorrow, I don't have a timestamp, but if early doors tomorrow, you can check in there and look up your either country or region or city, and you should be able to get a nice report on where your ecosystem is right now. A lot of those stats that Orla looked at included, so the VC funding, the combined ecosystem value, the stage, the top rounds, all of those bits, and you can actually download it into a nice wee PDF or some social friendly stuff as well, which is quite handy indeed. So good to have a look back there. Sorry, Orla.
These will be updated quarterly. So this is showing Q4 25 right now, but the Q1 numbers will be live early in the morning, and you can share and check out what your latest numbers are. There's over 400 locations in here between cities and countries, so you can take a look.
Super cool. All right. Maybe we can have a couple of questions. I was asking you a few of them as we were going along, Orla, but I did see a few other interesting ones. There was one about measuring like research commercialization and university impact. We touched on that briefly, but we have a lot of nice data, I think, around both spin-outs, so companies with some form of like tangible tie to a university, whether it's a licensing agreement or the company was actually started from research in that university or the university has equity, right? So spin-outs. But we also have the alumni founded data, which I really think is mega interesting. Looking at where the alumni end up. Do you want to talk about that a wee bit, Orla?
Yes, exactly. So a few bits on this. So you can find a particular university. They each all have a profile. And on here, you can see all of their spin-outs. So we've got 318 for University of Oxford. You can also have a look at their unicorns. Let's have a look. So we can see how many spin-outs from Oxford are unicorns, which are 7. But as you said, you can also have a look at their alumni-founded companies. So if we go back to this companies table, and we can, I need to actually do it in filters, but I can go down to founders in here. And then if I go to university, I can filter by Oxford or Oxford Books. Apply this, and then I can see that there are 4,500 companies founded by Oxford alumni. And what I think is one of the interesting bits, so I looked at the number of spin-outs that were unicorns before, which was 7, but in terms of alumni founded unicorns, there are 89. So that's quite a lot that Oxford University have produced. And it might be that for a university you have some of those spin-outs that are on your radar because you have a formal agreement with them, but maybe don't have the visibility on this wider network. And so understanding that full landscape is really, really interesting. I think one of the other things with these companies as well is that if I look at how many of them are in the UK, it's only 15. So again, even less likely potentially to be aware of the 74 that are headquartered overseas of these Oxford alumni founded unicorns.
It can be related. It's not necessarily related, but another question around kind of like founder stories and the flywheel effect from James Freeman, who I think is in Canada. Did you say, James? So can we measure the flywheel effect in an ecosystem involving capital recycled from successful exits, reinvested in early stage companies? We have some bits around like flywheel effect and founder factories, etc. Do you want to have a wee look at that, Orla?
Yes, exactly. So again, in this founder section, what is a cool thing is that you can track companies that are founded by the alumni of certain companies. So, ignoring universities, but if you say like actually Revolut is going to be a really strong training ground for talent. Well, there's 2 unicorns that have been founded by Revolut alumni as well. Or you can see the full list of 275 companies founded by Revolut alumni. So that's one of the ways you can kind of track and quantify some of the flywheel effect with that talent.
Nice. And you could also, I suppose, see in the like people tab any angels that previously worked at some of these big companies as well. So maybe another angle. Speaking of, well, another thing actually I just spotted there in the chat. Avnit asked, do we have LP data and some information on things like pension funds accessible?
Yes, we do. So that is how you would look at angels that worked at Revolut. So that's a bunch of them there. Yes, under investors, we have this LP dashboard here. So this has got loads of data about different pension funds and other fund of funds and how many VC investments fund investments they've made, and their AUM and a percentage allocated to VC, and lots of information about them as well. If you kind of click on CalPERS here, for example, you'll see examples of their LP investments and some insights as well.
Nice. I saw a question from Fiona, who I think is in Northern Ireland, but correct me if I'm wrong, Fiona. And this is more in relation to the startup definitions topic. I know we're at time, but there's a few really good questions here, so we should go through them very quickly. Fiona asked if we're looking at revenue growth rate as a metric. Maybe we can talk about that one really briefly, because we are tracking revenues, but growth rate has come up in, I think it's in the OECD definition. It's certainly in some other startup definitions, but you could also, there are some pitfalls with revenue growth. I mean, you're probably going to show us some revenue growth here, Orla, but I was going to say that with certain let's say, with the life cycle or with the journey of certain startups, like deep tech companies, let's say, what is the pitfall with having revenue growth, I suppose?
Yeah, so it's really difficult because companies are so, like startups are so different. As you said, like a nuclear fusion startup may have zero revenue until they crack it, and then they'll have many billions of revenue. So to say that they wouldn't be a startup because they don't have 20% annual year-on-year revenue growth for 3 years, that would be a shame. And also companies can have very non-linear growth. So you might have 100% growth 1 year and then, not the next. So focusing only on that, I think, is a bit of a challenge. We do track revenue in Dealroom. So you can find companies here. I've added in companies with between 10 and 100 million revenue. And if you kind of go through to one of their pages, we can see information about their revenue growth over previous years as well. So, here's an example. We've got 19% growth there, and then one the next year. So it can really go up and down a fair bit. And equally, this company, a very young company, and then they went bang to 100 million. That's like infinite growth. So it can be very nonlinear. But yeah, we do track revenues basically, and so you can have a look, but we'd just caution against it for those reasons.
Yeah, nice. Maybe that's something we can wrap up with then, folks, because we're gone a wee bit over time. I really hope you enjoyed the session. For me, the overarching point is yes, of course, you can measure the number of startups, scale-ups, unicorns, thoroughbreds, etc. within your ecosystem, but we just shouldn't focus on single numbers. Ecosystems are pretty complex, right? We talk a lot about startup demographics rather than just thinking again of one single number. But yeah, there are plenty of ways that you can measure your ecosystem. And here we suggested a few that we think matter a lot. So I hope you had some useful takeaways from that. If you're not already measuring your ecosystem, or you're thinking of changing the way you measure your ecosystem, do let us know. We'd be really happy to help, as Orla said, either by letting you self-serve, I suppose, via the platform directly, or having our insights team, Orla and co, actually helping you with that directly. So do give us a shout. Thanks so much again for joining us. Hope to see you on the next one, which is probably coming up pretty soon, but we can let you know. Thanks. We have recorded this session, so we will send it out to you. Feel free to share it with your teams or peers if you found it useful. And yeah, hope you have a lovely day, and speak to you all soon. Thanks a million.
Thanks, I'll see you soon.
Bye.